Welcome to the American University. I welcome you on the behalf of AUPs, the graduate students of the School of International Studies, and the Economic Graduate Student Union. John Stockwell is the highest-ranking CIA agent to go public. He is an ex-Marine and winner of CIA's Medal of Merit. He served as an officer in charge in Vietnam and as director of covert war in Angola. He served with the CIA for 12 years. John Stockwell is the author of 8 books, the most well-known being In Search of Enemies, which he wrote about the CIA and over which the CIA sued him. As a result, he received a court order ordering him to submit everything that he writes to the CIA for censorship, and which awarded all the royalties of the book to the CIA. This makes John the only author I know who regularly asks people not to buy his book. John has also written fiction, including a novel entitled Red Sunset, unique for its premonitions of glasnost in the Soviet Union. Last September, I spoke to John and I asked him if he could focus his talk on Central America and Nicaragua. At the time, the 5 Central American presidents had just agreed to the demobilization of the Contra, and the Nicaraguan elections were underway. Our main concern was to keep Central America, and especially Nicaragua's upcoming elections, in the arena of rational discussion, and to counteract the Bush administration's destabilization and misinformation policies. The topic has become timely in a way that couldn't have been foreseen, since Ortega was forced to declare an end to his unilateral ceasefire last week. We are fortunate to have John Stockwell with us tonight to help shed light on the events in this region. Please join me in welcoming John Stockwell.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me and for the welcome and for the good turnout. Let me begin by correcting a minor detail, and this is not the fault of my host. I'm not the highest-ranking CIA officer to go public. There have been CIA directors going public all the time. I think I have the distinction of being one of the highest case officers to go public and endeavor to tell the truth about what the CIA has been up to. We're going to talk about that tonight, the CIA's secret wars, but what I've done over the years since I left the agency is to pursue in my readings the broader subjects of how the CIA's secret wars, to understand them for sure, and show how they interrelate to the broader problems that also affect, or perhaps really affect, our national security interest. Tonight we're going to talk about the secret wars of the CIA and the nuclear arms race in the age of glasnost, with an ex-CIA director for president. We've got Mikhail Gorbachev's policies of openness on the one hand and George Bush on the other side saying we're a kinder and more humane nation. They're telling us that the communist bloc is breaking apart, the Cold War is over, the arms race is over, and if this were altogether true, it would be absolutely wonderful. Unfortunately, our world is still fraught with some grievous problems. Our planet is still booby-trapped with 60,000 thermonuclear weapons, and our factories are still producing them as fast as ever and testing and developing them as vigorously as ever. We've just gotten through spending $2.2 trillion, and that's a conservative figure that's been published, on the largest arms buildup in the history of the world, at least at peace, and coincidentally increased our national debt. We were not a debtor nation before, by about the same amount of $2 trillion. The United States still has an open policy of supporting coups and destabilizations and low-intensity conflicts in every corner of the globe, the U.S. doing this through the CIA, my old organization. And as you all well know, our society is said to be drowning in a sea of drugs, and integral to all of this is the systematic destruction of our environment. And it's my thesis that these subjects interrelate: drug trafficking, the arms race, conventional wars, the destruction of the environment, and the killing of the United States president in 1963, and the CIA's secret wars. All of these things are interwoven together. And it's my purpose tonight to try to give you, in 1 hour, a sense of how these things interrelate. It's a vast subject, a dense subject. I can't possibly do justice to it in the time allowed. This means I'm going to have to insult your intelligence by skimming across the top of subjects that you could get a PhD dissertation written in and still not cover thoroughly. So all I can do is just try my best, and in the question and answer I'll stay with you a goodly time taking questions in detail on the areas that you want to pursue in greater detail. I also publish a bibliography, and we'll put the address up here where you can order copies of it, of the best 120 books that I've found on the subject, and I have a brief review of each of the books in it and some introductory remarks that may help you to pursue this subject. Mind you, we have thousands of books have been written about national security and world security and U.S. security, and these are merely the best 120 books that I've found on the subject. This massive documentation, of course, is the salvation of the intellectually attuned. I urge you to read for yourselves. Do not take anything I'm saying tonight as the gospel. I'm telling you that our leaders lie to us. They lie to us systematically. They lie to us with a purpose that may not be your purpose. Some of their lies, if you're a young man, may motivate you to go off someday and die, be killed, or to kill people. And the only way you can defend yourself against other people programming you, because we are programmable. Marine Corps boot camp taught me that. They can teach you and get you fired up, rah, 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 and then say charge, and you'll charge up the hill without asking why, and perhaps not come down the hill feet first. The French have a saying that I mangle in translation: them that don't do politics will be done. If you don't defend yourself by filling your mind with a true understanding of what's happening in the world, then others will fill it up for you, and then at some point in time use the information and the conditioning that they've planted in your mind and breast to use you, if you will. Once again, I have a bibliography. I urge you to read for yourself. I urge you to reach inside the books and go to their bibliographies and pursue the subject on beyond and travel and inform yourselves. We're going to take Nicaragua tonight. We're going to get into these awesome subjects of the arms race and whatnot from my specialty, which was CIA's activities. I was a manager in 3 of the CIA's so-called secret wars, or low-intensity conflicts, or whatever you would call them. We're going to start with them, of course, and we're going to start with Nicaragua as a case study, because it's particularly timely, because the elections are coming up, because we've been beating up on Nicaragua for the last 10 years, and coincidentally, because it's very much in the news right now, today, tonight, during this last week. In fact, the Washington Post has special op-eds on it and editorial pieces on it today. I was just reading them in my hotel room. The Contras have moved several thousand armed fighters down into the country, but the State Department says they're not there to fight, they're just down there to encourage people to vote. But they're killing people, and Ortega sees his responsibility as trying to stop people from killing people in his country. He's doing exactly what President George Bush would do if there were a force in this country gunning people down. And so he has said that this ceasefire is no longer a ceasefire, and our media, the State Department Post and the other newspapers that are published in this city and elsewhere, are all falling right into line with the propaganda lines of attacking Ortega and trying to use his actions to put him under political pressure to discredit him, if they can, to the degree they can. Now, another reason we're picking Nicaragua for a case study is because it's just particularly useful of all the hundreds of CIA operations that we could dissect. And mind you, Angola is in the news. And I was once chief of the Angola task force on a subcommittee of the National Security Council called the Interagency Working Group, commanding, although I was working closely under the supervision of Jim Potts of the Africa Division and Henry Kissinger and the CIA Director Bill Colby. And Angola is very much in the news, and Savimbi was just in town, and I'm also clearly tempted to talk about Angola. But Nicaragua is a better example, because it's closer to the United States culturally and physically, and because this covert action destabilization that we've run against Nicaragua has been open on both ends. Usually these things are closed. Usually our government is covering them and hiding them to the greatest degree it can, and the country we're attacking becomes hostile and paranoid and seals its borders. In the case of Nicaragua, until last year, until quite recently, it had a policy of remaining open. Anyone from the states who wanted to go down and have a look could do so without getting a visa. Meanwhile, in Washington, the thing was debated quite openly, from war aid and details of the aid and abuse of the aid and the little gradations of rules we put on how the aid could be spent. So we knew it from both ends. And during the entire period of the 80s, I was traveling back and forth from Washington to Nicaragua to elsewhere, informing myself to assess this thing, and also using the material in my lectures. Also, unlike Angola, there was never a chance in Angola that we would make it into another Vietnam, putting in U.S. troops seriously, and this is a very real possibility in Nicaragua during the mid-80s. It's a remote possibility today. The U.S., of course, as you know, has had a fixation on Nicaragua since the mid-1800s. It's been the issue of a second canal or a better canal, of different interests trying to develop it, of military interventions, of putting the Marines in there half a dozen times to occupy it, to dominate it, to force elections, to control events in that country. The Marines were eventually withdrawn in 1933 as a result of the international pressure of the international peace movement, and at that time we switched into a more subtle phase of the ancient Monroe Doctrine, where instead of using Marines so much with gunboat diplomacy, we created a National Guard with officers trained at our academies here in the States, and then maintained control of the country by proxy without taking the heat for having our troops inside the country itself. It's been said that this event was the birth of neocolonialism. This also was the kickoff of the U.S. policy of establishing a military oligarchy. We set up schools and trained tens of thousands of military and police officers in countries all over Latin America and Africa in some cases and Asia, putting them through our academies, arming them, paying their salaries afterwards, trying to create and successfully creating a situation where we would have a fraternity of people in these countries in power who were more loyal to the fraternity of our own military than they were to the peasants and people of their own countries. Meanwhile, this cat and mouse game that we've played with Nicaragua since 1981 is a classic case of what CI directors more recently themselves called destabilization. The point is to put pressure on the targeted government by ripping apart the social and economic fabric of the country. Now that's words, you know, social and economic fabric. That means making the people suffer as much as you can until the country plunges into chaos, until at some point you can step in and impose your choice of governments on that country. The rationales we've used in Nicaragua are classic. We've been fighting communism. It's been national security. They're a Marxist bastion in our own backyard, and all of that. More specifically, our leaders have said at first that the purpose of this program was to interdict the flow of arms from Nicaragua to the rebels in El Salvador. Unable to prove any flow of arms whatsoever from Nicaragua into El Salvador, they eventually got into the line which they used in the last few years of returning Nicaragua to democracy. And then we pointed out to them that Nicaragua never had a democracy, certainly not under the Somoza dictatorships, so they call it the democratization of Nicaragua, ignoring the fact that Nicaragua, by the way, had elections in 1984 that were much more democratic than the elections that we had in this republic. We don't live in a democracy in the United States itself. Now, we, I submit, will never know exactly what the Sandinistas would have done with this country of Nicaragua if we had left them alone to react to the country's problems according to their own interests and ideology and compulsions. We do know, however, that they abolished the death sentence at exactly the same time the United States was reinstituting the death sentence in this country. Maximum penalty in their courts is 30 years in jail. They released thousands of the hated National Guard that they had in their custody, saying that they would not jail anyone for having belonged to an organization. They would have to be